Hello, welcome to Prajim Technologies. I am Venkat. This is part 2 of SQL Server. In this session, we'll understand how to create, alter, and drop a database. In part 1 of this video series, we have seen how to connect to a SQL Server using SQL Server Management Studio. Having connected to the SQL Server, now it's time for us to create a database. Now remember, in SQL Server, most of the things can be done in two ways. One is graphically using SQL Server Management Studio or using a query. Now let us see how to create a database graphically using SQL Server Management Studio. Let's flip back to SQL Server Management Studio. Now within the Object Explorer window, you see a databases folder. Right click on the databases folder and select a new database. And the moment we do that, you see a new database dialog box. All you have to do here is provide the name of the new database that you want to create. For example, let's say I want to create a database with name sample1 and click OK. So what's going to happen now? Behind the scenes, SQL Server Management Studio is going to issue a query to have this database created for us. So if you expand the databases folder, you should see sample1 database created there. Now we can also create a database using a query. Now let us see how to create a database using a query. Now database is also one of the types of SQL Server objects. Just like database, you can create tables, views, triggers, stored procedures, etc., which we will be talking about in a later session. But remember, irrespective of the type of the object that you are creating in SQL Server, you use the create statement. Okay, so create. Now if I want to create a database, I will say database. And on the other hand, let's say if I want to create a table, I will say table. If I want to create a view, I would say create view. Okay, so depending on the type of the object, you specify the type of the object that you want to create, which in our case is a database. So create database. And what is the name of the database that I want to create? So let's say I want to create a database called sample2. Okay, create database and the name of the database. Execute. So what's going to happen now? It creates this database sample2. So to see that database, refresh the databases folder and you should see sample2 there. And let's say for some reason, you close the Object Explorer and you want it back, just go to the View menu and select Object Explorer. So you have it back. Alright, so we have seen how to create a database graphically using the designer as well as using a query. Now irrespective of how you have created the database, when we create a database, there are two files that gets generated. Now let's look at properties of one of these databases that we have created. And look at this. These two are user-defined databases. Whereas if I expand system databases folder, you see there are some system databases, master, model, MSDB, TempDB. These databases are provided by SQL Server installation itself, and these are required for proper functioning of the SQL Server, so they should be there. So system databases and user-defined databases. User-defined databases are the databases that we create. Okay, now for every database that we have, whether it is a system database or a user-defined database, okay, there are two files that gets generated. Now let's right click on one of the user-defined databases, go into properties, and in the files tab you will have a path. Okay, so there is a path here. Let me copy that path, paste that in the run window and press enter. Now if you look at this, you see there is sample1.mdf and sample1_log.ldf. So these are the two files that are related to the database that we have just created, sample1 and sample2. So sample2.mdf, sample2_log.ldf. Okay, so what are these files? So MDF file is nothing but the data file, and this is the actual master data file which contains actual data. Whereas LDF is a transaction log file, and we use this file basically to recover the database in case if there are any problems. Okay, we will be talking about these two files in a great detail in a later session, but for now understand that whenever we create a database, these two files get generated, .mdf and .ldf. MDF master data file, LDF log data file. Alright, we have seen how to create a database. Now let's see how to rename a database after it's been created. Now again, to rename the database there are two ways. One, you can graphically do that using SQL Server Management Studio, or you can write a query. And to graphically do that, just right click on the database and select rename, just like how you rename a file within the Windows file system, and then provide your new name there and press enter. The name will be changed automatically. But on the other hand, let us say how to rename a database using a query. Now if you want to do it with query, then there are two ways to do it. One is to basically use alter database command. So alter database and then the name of the database, modify name is equal to new database name. Alright, let's see how to do that. Let's say I want to change the name of sample2 database to sample3. So alter database, and I want to alter sample2 database. And what do I want to alter? I want to alter the name to sample3. So when I execute this query, what's going to happen? The name has been changed from sample2 to sample3. And if you want to see that change, just refresh this folder. So now you should see sample3. Another way to change the name of the database is to use one of the system stored procedures. Now we'll be talking about stored procedures in a later session, but understand that stored procedures, are nothing but a group of commands that are executed together. We'll be talking about them in a later session, but right now understand that there are two types of stored procedures. One is system stored procedures and the other one is user defined stored procedures. Now what are system stored procedures? These are provided by Microsoft SQL Server, which are basically used for functions like renaming a stored procedure, or if you want to view the text of a stored procedure, you can use sp_help text. If you want to find out how many indexes are there on a table, you can basically use a stored procedure called sp_help index. There are several system stored procedures that we use for a variety of different tasks, which we will be looking at as we go through this course. But for now, understand that if you want to rename a database, there is a system stored procedure called sp_rename db which can be used. And to this stored procedure, obviously if you have to change the name of a database, you will have to tell it what is the database whose name you want to change and what is the new name. So provide these two parameters to this stored procedure, which will do its job. Let's see how to do that. So let's say I want to change sample3 database to sample4. So sp_rename db, and what is the old name of this database, sample3, and I want to change that to sample4. So the database name sample4 has been set, and now if we refresh, you should see sample4. Alright, so we have seen how to create a database and how to alter a database. Now finally, let us see how to drop a database or delete a database. Okay, again, to drop or delete a database, you can basically do that graphically using SQL Server Management Studio or by writing a query. For example, if I want to drop this database, I can just right click that and say delete. Okay, and the moment I do that, what's going to happen behind the scenes, it will delete the MDF and LDF files that are associated with this database. Okay, so if you go to that folder, you see sample1.mdf and sample1_log.ldf. Now if I delete this graphically, so I'm deleting this database, click OK. So what's going to happen, that database got deleted, and if you go into the folder, the log files and the MDF files, both of those files should also be deleted. Okay, now we have seen how to do that graphically. Now let's see how to do that using a query. To drop any object, let it be database, table, view, stored procedure, etc., we basically use the drop statement. Drop, what do I want to drop? I want to drop a database, so database, and then the name of the database that you want to drop, let's say sample4. So when I execute this query, what's going to happen? Sample4 database will be deleted, and behind the scenes both the MDF and LDF files will also be deleted. But remember, when you are dropping a database, that database should not be in use. For example, let's understand what we mean by that. Look at this. This is the database server, and all the developers or users can connect to that database using their respective computers. Now let us say this developer is using our sample 4 database. Developer 1 is using sample 4 database, and developer 2 is trying to delete the database. Okay, so what should happen ideally? It shouldn't be deleted, because this user will get an error because there is a query, for example, that's being executed, and while that query of developer 1 is being executed, developer 2 is trying to delete the database. Okay, so what happens at that point of time? The database will not be deleted. Developer 2 will get an error stating that the database is in use and cannot be deleted. Okay. So you cannot drop a database if it's currently in use. You get an error stating cannot drop database because it is currently in use. So if the other users are connected, you need to put the database in a single user mode and then drop the database. Okay, so if there are so many users connected to the database, then the database is set to be in multi-user mode. Okay, so you will have to bring it back to single user mode before you can actually drop that if there are people currently connected to that database that you're trying to delete. Okay, and the way we do that is we again use the alter database command. Alter database, the database name that we want to alter, and we want to set the database in single user mode with rollback immediate. What we mean by with rollback immediate? Now this option, let's say for example, if we go back to the next slide, let's say this user is actually using the database and there is a long running query. The query is taking, let's say, 10 minutes to execute, and this developer is trying to delete that, and obviously developer 2 cannot delete that because that database is currently in use. So what this guy can do, developer 2 can do, basically he can force the database to be set into single user mode, and then at that point of time he can also tell, okay, if there are any pending transactions running on that server, roll them back immediately. Okay, so this option with rollback immediate basically tells, okay, if there are any incomplete transactions, roll them back immediately and close the connection to the database. Okay, so this is the command that we use. Let us simulate that. Let's say, let's open another SQL Server Management Studio and try to connect to that, and then let's put the sample 4 database into use there. So let's connect to SQL Server Management Studio. Okay, so we are connected to SQL Server Management Studio, and let's open up a new query editor window and let's select sample 4 here. So it's like this is one user who is using sample 4 database, and this is another user who is trying to drop the database. Now let's try to drop this database and see what's going to happen. So I'm trying to drop this database. Look at this. This query is trying to drop the database, but we are not able to do that because this user is currently connected. Okay, but on the other hand, let's cancel this query. Look at this. It's still not completed. It's waiting for that user to release that. So let's cancel this query. Let me close this connection. And now if I execute this statement, it will be dropped immediately. Or what you can basically do is you can graphically do that. Delete the database, and you can say close existing connections, which will basically do effectively the same thing. Okay. Let's say if I put this database, if I select this database, currently I have selected sample 4 database, and if I try to drop the database, because if you look at this, I'm trying to use that and at the same time I'm trying to drop that. Look at what's going to happen. Cannot drop the database because it's currently in use. Okay, so obviously if you have to drop a database, that database cannot be in use, otherwise you get an error stating so. Okay, so if I drop this now, the database will be dropped, and if you refresh, you should see that the database is gone now. Okay, keep that in mind. If you want to drop a database that's in use, you can use alter database name set single user with rollback immediate, and with this rollback immediate option will basically roll back all incomplete transactions and closes any connections to the database that you're trying to drop. And also a very important point to keep in mind, system databases cannot be dropped. For example, if I try to delete one of the system database, you cannot do that. You will get an error, drop database. Let's say for example I want to drop the master database, and if I execute that, look at that, cannot drop the database master because it's a system database. On this slide you can find resources for ASP.NET and C# interview questions. That's it for today. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.